give you all of the detail and the information and all the nuggets of juicy bits of gold that will help everything else move smoothly, but it's also where we tell you that it's somewhat bumpier than any others would expect. But as a collective here before you, we'd rather you know exactly where things are, so at least you can help prepare before calls start and activity commences. I've already introduced myself. I'm Quin from Midlands. I'm going to be giving a bit of an overview presentation to start with, because there are things that I can say that possibly some of my colleagues are limited to say. The reason I'm doing it is because not only do I have a governance role at an East Midlands level, and I have an active role with some of the LEPs, but I also now have a secured seat on the Growth Programme Board on behalf of the monitoring community sector, so I can see what's happening at national level from a governance perspective. So hopefully those chunk a bit of that in. Also with me, we've got Pete Holmes from Biz, who we spoke this morning, and Mark Foley, and I'm also delighted to welcome Eileen who's here from the Department of Pensions for the regional ESF team, and it's nice because I suspect that there will be questions about ESF. There are, I don't have anybody here from DEFRA, so I can't, well, we could field some questions around the Rural Development Programme, but only a few. Right, so let's get started. In terms of the next programme, it's going to take about 15 minutes, and these slides will be made available. At the end of these slides, there's also some links and further information and some detail on the individual thematic objectives or priority axes that relate to ERDF and the sort of indicators and the outcomes that are expected. I'm not going to go through those today, but they are on here. So what's different this time? Much stronger links with the European strategy, Horizon 2020, Europe 2020, all of that stuff. Clear harmony between what's expected from each of the member states and what those strategies are aiming to achieve. There is a much greater focus on results, and that focus on results will come up with a financial penalty and a reserve towards the end. So, and that isn't just results in terms of indicators for individual activities. It's also obviously the spend, which has always been a results issue, and also on cross-cutting themes. So there's a much clearer focus on results and therefore a performance framework that underpins them. There will be greater conditionalities around making sure there is effective spend, and as Mark's already mentioned, we're looking at an M+3 programming period. The big change in England is more localised planning through the LEPs. But the big difference compared to certainly the ERDF programme is that they won't be distinct local programmes. The LEPs have a notional allocation of European programme monies, of growth programme monies, but they don't actually have the cash other than in London, which is the only one which has intermediary body status. There's a much strengthened partnership principle underpinned by the European Code of Conduct on Partnership Working, which really reinforces the principle that at every level, so that's at planning, at delivery, at evaluation stages, that all relevant partners, socio-economic and environmental partners, should be involved at every stage around European programmes. And that needs to, and that's starting to be policed both at a LEP, EU subcommittee level and right up to the national level as well. And there's an increased emphasis on the use of tools, so things like community-led local development and also financial instruments as mechanisms to get economic growth working, particularly with focus on key sectors. I don't want to go into this in too much detail, but in terms of the strategy, you already know it is a combined growth programme with a single growth programme board. I'll send out a governance structure, but essentially the growth programme board is a national board, and it has a series of both national and local subcommittees acting with it. So we've got a national overarching strategy with local plans and priorities through the local ESIF strategies. Top priorities nationally have been research and innovation, SME competitive. SME competitive is the primary national priority. It's actually 39% of ERDF, and it's the single part of the programme with the most finances allocated to it. Low carbon economy and employment and inclusion. So where are we in terms of the strategy and how that's progressed? The partnership agreement with the Commission is now agreed and in place. That was done and dusted at the end of last year. The Rural Operational Programme, the EFRID programme, has been agreed in principle, and full sign-off is expected in March, which is really good. That's well ahead of schedule. In terms of ERDF, the operational programme is broadly though, there's quite a lot still to do, particularly around certain thematic objectives. So low carbon was the most behind in terms of sections. There's an awful lot of content still to add in there. And I think there's been a recent iteration, is that right? So maybe you'll chip in on that. Do you want to say anything about that now?
Only that I think literally yesterday, it was said earlier about a series of national calls being launched now. I think yesterday the four words was agreed that in consultation with DEC as well, so that that can now go out and will be in discussion with LEPs probably literally as we speak to identify sort of key initial priorities that they want to put into this first round of calls. So as Rachel, I think I said earlier, certain things where we have great levels of confidence that it won't be contentious with the European Commission. I think we now just stage where we can say we're ready to go on low carbon as well. So I'm sure there will be a document that will be shared and finance to partners over the coming days.
To give you a feel of the pace of change of this, this was the position in the Growth Programme Board at the beginning of February, and we've now got further iterations out now. So you're looking at 2-3, every couple of weeks actually this is changing. So this is where it is right now. Innovation is pretty much there, but there's a lot of queries around the use of financial instruments to stimulate innovation. The Commission are looking for far more intervention logic around the role of innovation centres and how they're going to play out. So you will expect to see more detail coming out around that. In terms of climate change, we were discouraged from taking too much use of the climate change thematic objectives, but it's certainly been, the argument has been one about flood mitigation as a result of climate change in quite a lot of the LEP areas. But what the Commission are looking for are greater use of soft defences, so rather than building walls and dams and that sort of thing, it's about sort of flood risk areas, you know, and sort of opening up elements of land to mitigate those sorts of things. ICT, there's still a lot of work to do around the broadband intervention logic, particularly around where it will go, who needs to benefit, and the business case for businesses needing to benefit from increased broadband speeds. And the big thing around ERDF is the targets. The targets are not there yet. So a little bit further on this, I'll give you a feel for the indicators that are likely to be used, but they are still in negotiation. And up to the point where we go to, if there is an early call, they will still be in negotiation at that point. In terms of the ESF operational strategy, it's very different. The overall approach, I think, has been broadly agreed. The big issue there is about the targets. The key concern with the ESF programme is that it's going to look very different from previous programmes in that we now have relatively low overall unemployment. It's about who and about individuals and the level of inequality within that unemployment and exclusion and the sorts of skills that are needed in order to drive the economy. So that's how, there's quite a lot of negotiation. Is there anything you want to say about that? Is that okay? So targets around ESF are a way off yet. So that's the strategy. in terms of where we're at. The next bit is about the actual process. So what's the application's going to look like, what's being put in place. So ESF opt-ins have been agreed, and both the Skills Funding Agency and NOMS, which are the two largest of those, are moving towards delivery at risk. So they've started putting out calls, they're starting to put supply chains in place. Certainly the SFA put a call out recently, but that will be open, I am assured, and that people will be able to continue to apply into that if they want to deliver against SFA contracts. For the vast majority of open call activity, it's going to be a two-stage process. So there will be an expression of interest followed by a full application stage. In fact, most of the opt-in activity is also following a two-stage process as well. So you can expect that. Where there are opt-in providers in place, they are mid-negotiating deliverables and the approach with LEPs at the minute. Part of that is prescribed, so certainly with the SFA they're drawing on their previous experience, but a lot of it is still in negotiation. So those conversations are happening. There is likely to be first calls of activity beginning in March, and the date of the 16th, particularly for ERDF and the sorts of stuff we were talking about this morning, has been mooted. Whatever happens, if a call is going to happen in March, it must start before PERDA, which is the 30th. So if it hasn't happened by the 30th, it isn't going to happen because there won't be any announcements for calls. And just to reiterate, we said don't all rush. This is only for continuity or critical activity, but it will be of scale. We've mentioned the term £500,000 minimum contract. That's 500,000 of ERDF. So we're talking £1 million programmes for this early call, literally because it's not expected to be a broad call. There will certainly be a call around some SME competitiveness, but the other thing that is likely to come out is technical assistance. There will be some call around the availability of local technical assistance, but it isn't clear yet whether the national technical assistance will be included in that. The main call, as Mark said earlier, will be in the summer, so I expect around June. And in terms of what that call will look like and the system that's put in place, you'll be shocked and stunned to know that a fully working operational IT system has not yet been developed. Gasps. So we have an interim system by the name of LogosNet, which is going to be used. Worth bearing in mind that system will require pre-registration in order to be able to log in and use it. And in order to make the call work properly, there will be a call for pre-registration going out soon, this week. So we will endeavour to make sure everybody knows when that call goes out, so you can pre-register and you're not worried about that at the time. There will be a different system ultimately, and I have no idea. Do you want to say anything?
What we will actually be doing is asking organisations to identify individuals that will need access to the system, because it will be done on an individual basis to input application details. The reason why the proper system isn't up and running yet, the first problem is procurement, so it affects us as well. And the second issue was when we actually done the procurement properly, the supplier suddenly realised he wasn't able to deliver what we needed, so we had to go back to that one and re-procure it. So LogosNet is fine, I've seen it working and it's fine.
You couldn't write it, could you? This I bummed up because most people will have already seen this. So this is just going back to that open call route and the fact there'll be a two-stage process. So essentially you've got a relationship between the LEP area, ESIF committees, the managing authority and the applicant, where the call specification, the promotion happens jointly between the managing authority and the LEP area ESIF subcommittee. You move into an outline stage, and then assuming that eligibility is okay, move towards a full application. It's fairly straightforward. We would expect from here through to here to take 5 months, 6 months.
The contract.
There is no answer to the question how long is a piece of string, because I've probably said this so many times over the last few years. It becomes unbearable, but really the applications are in a fit state with all the questions answered and all the information provided quickly do tend to be dealt with more quickly. Now, there were issues on our East Midlands with capacity, and that did slow things down. There's no hiding from that fact. And I apologise many times for that, but we are doubling the size of our team over the next 3 to 4 months. So I'm hoping that some of the capacity issues will disappear. But certainly, you're looking at a turnaround of around 4 months over the average in my view.
Okay. Next bit is around how accurate the selection criteria, which I think is useful to know. There are 2 stages of selection criteria: gateway criteria and core selection criteria. The gateway criteria will primarily only apply to the expression of interest stage, and the core selection criteria will be done far more jointly with the LEP at full application, although there will be an element of both, because obviously if application then comes back at full application stage with a very different approach or a very different lead body, then some questions will be asked. But essentially the gateway criteria is exactly what you would expect. The applicant must be eligible, the activity must be eligible, and the project must broadly meet the objectives in the operational programme and any locally defined priorities. So it's an absolute basic check. The core selection criteria is more detailed, so we're looking far more deeply at strategic fit, value for money, management and control, so how, not just expertise, but whether the organisation that's leading is setting up the right sort of systems, is bringing in the right sort of capacity in order to manage a programme of whatever size is being proposed. Deliverability, is this functional within the climate? Has the research been done? Is it evidenced? All of that bit. Compliance will be very important. So has the approach within the project been taken around public procurement, around state aid, around publicity and marketing, and any other national eligibility rules? So has that been considered within the application? And lastly, there will be specific selection criteria around the cross-cutting themes, but there's very little information on what that will look like yet. I've put this one in because this is one of the ESF opt-in processes. It's far too complicated for anyone nearing even the second row back to be able to see it. But essentially, it's just saying that at an opt-in phase, this is the big lottery funds opt-in, they are also looking at putting in place a 2-stage process. The difference with the big lottery fund opt-in is that they're also putting in non-EU funded technical support at both the pre-application and post-EOI stage to get people up and running and into the programme, which I think is quite interesting. I'm not sure whether any of the other opt-ins are providing that. Next bit is around indicators. We've had a lot of questions about what are the specific indicators that are likely to be used across both ESF and ERDF. So I spent most of last night reading the operational programmes for both as where they are, because I have no life. This is pretty much where we are. So ESF is very much as you would expect. It's about participants, but those are broken down far more carefully in this programme around gender split, unemployment status and inactivity status, over 50s, ethnic minorities, disability status, single households with dependent children and offenders or ex-offenders. So actually looking at those and comparing those to baseline figures are specific targets within ESF. Basic skills and employment-related skills are in there. A movement into employment, including self-employment, both on leaving whatever intervention and also after 6 months. Completion of the Youth Employment Initiative. And the receipt of an offer of employment or training. So those are the sorts of indicators that are most common across the ESF framework. In terms of ERDF, they're quite different to the targets that we've had before. So that we have a percentage of SMEs which are innovation active, So SMEs that are actively sort of developing products and engaging with research and development activity. Number of new enterprises, and those enterprises who are receiving support, grants or other types of support to help them be more productive. Number of researchers working in improved facilities, and the number of businesses benefiting from working with those researchers. There are targets around that. Public or commercial build or renovation, so this is similar to previous capital programmes, but it's quite specific around that. Broadband access of greater than 30 megabytes per second. Percentage of SMEs selling goods or services via a website. Total early stage entrepreneurial activity. Private investment levered. Employment increase in supported enterprises. Increase in SME productivity, and that's particularly around a gap analysis between the gross value added within SMEs compared to large companies in the same locality. SME jobs created, and also there are a range of specific indicators relating to resource efficiency and environmental improvements. That's quite a suite of indicators and targets, I would suggest, and quite different to what we've had before. The actual definitions of each of those indicators are still under negotiation, and they're still being defined. So there is a draft version of it about. Is it available? It's not. Okay. It's where it is. Lastly, I just want to move on to governance. As I said before, there is a National Growth Programme Board, which is effectively the PMC, the Programme Monitoring Committee for both ESF and ERDF. And it also provides a direct advisory function to the EFRID programme on matters of economic growth. There are 5 national policy subcommittees, 4 of which relate to ERDF outcomes. So there's one on, I've got a diagram somewhere, I'll put it up in a minute. And there are 4 operational ones. So one looking at equalities, one looking I'll have to find it. So we've got 9 national subcommittees, 39 local LEP area ESIF subcommittees, and all of which have to be driven by the European Code of Conduct for Partnership Working. It's a very complicated system, and the mechanism for how those interact is not clear as yet. I think there are also concerns around the policy subcommittees, because you have 4 related to ERDF activity, which, considering most of the ERDF activity will go through open call, is probably justified, and one of those will focus on the Sustainable Urban Development Limited bodies. But there is only one covering the entirety of the ESF programme around employment skills and social inclusion, which I think is quite a large chunk of policy to have in one single forum, personally. And lastly, there are now starting to emerge some useful documents that I think will be helpful to you. So the gov.uk website now has a simplified, if you put in European growth funding, you'll get all the access to what's going on with this, and there's some useful bits and bobs on there, including a recently published ESIF Growth Programme Handbook, which summarises exactly where we're at, what the thematic objectives are, how it's going to work. It's useful to have it as a reference tool. Other things that are on there include there is now interim, as I mentioned earlier, interim guidance on publicity and branding. Now it is interim, but it is well worked up, and it does cover all of the European programmes. There's also guidance on sustainable development practice, and I've put links to those. So there's integrating environmental sustainability into projects, developing an environmental sustainability checklist, resilient growth information note, and natural England resources and publication on green infrastructure. That's kind of where we're at. Behind this, I've also put the objectives, the specific objectives as they are now and how they apply to the main ERDF priority axes I'm not going to go through those, but they are there and they include technical assistance. There's a bit more information on eligibility, and I've also put a link to the specific regulations in case any of you struggle to sleep at night. I thought that might be useful. Okay, are there things that my colleagues want to chip in before we go to questions? Are you sure? Last chance. Okay. So at this point, so you have here a representative from this as the negotiating party, DCLG for ERDF, and from Department for Working Pensions on the ESF side. Are there questions? Right, how are we going to do this? We'll have to use those, I think. This is a very simple one. The draft output definitions that we assigned to November, do we ignore those?
Okay, that works. I wouldn't ignore them, I'd use them as guidelines. That's probably the simplest way to say it.
Hello, could I just ask a question about the Youth Employment Initiative, which I think is going to be part of the March call? Suggestion that there will be a limit of up to a minimum of £100,000 in relation to that call for that programme. Does anybody know how that's going to work specifically, particularly in Leicester?
I haven't heard it was going to be for 1 year, it was 100,000. No, is the answer. We know with the, we said we're going to launch at the same time as the ERDF. And the point being, we only want the opt-ins to do that simply because they take a long time and they're not ready. 1 year is an exception because it's time bound. So other than that, I have no other information on it, but the YEIs we would expect to win a bid in March. Does that help?
Yeah, no, but I have seen one of the LEP papers which suggests Wi-Fi activity launched in March and Leicestershire.
That's as much as I've heard.
Can I got a comment on that?
Can you clarify what the situation about match funding will be? Will it be a kind of standard 50% intervention rate across everything, or will there be kind of levels of match, or how will that work again between the ERDF and the ESF?
Well, in terms of ERDF, the intervention rate at the programme level is 50%. We colleagues are looking at whether or not that can be varied. Obviously, if it's a lower than 50% intervention rate, that's good, because we get more activity for the ERDF value. Of course, if it goes above 50%, then we get less activity, but having a higher intervention rate also reduces the burden around match funding. So there are pros and cons to those approaches, and they're being looked at the moment.
Just one slight variation to that. I think I'm right to say in Greater Lincolnshire, which is classified as a transitional area, the match funding rate is 40%, so you have a 60% intervention rate.
Okay, I saw some more hands earlier. Come on, Bob. Not at all.
One of the things that was discussed this morning was the need to identify collaborative technical assistance. There seems to be a lot of need around procurement support and state aid to do sorts of looking at nationally.
We will provide guidance, as I said this morning, and we'll provide a signposting because that's as much as we can do. In terms of technical assistance, if there are subject-specific capacity issues, such as state aid and procurement, as part of the technical assistance plan that we've asked for as part of the March bidding round, then that can be included. And then obviously the technical assistance also has a cost in terms of the match funding has to be found. So obviously you have to then procure and get the right type of supported. So you can do that. It can be part of the capacity building within local technical assistance strategies. Although strategy is probably too strong a use of the word, but we will be more sort of providing the guidance and signposting. Any more than that puts us into a conflict position should something go wrong.
Is there an alignment between business sort of start-up loan company and the ERDF's access to finances? Will there be, or is there?
So sorry, I didn't catch the first part of that.
So the so-called loans, basically, the start-up loans. Is there going to be an alignment between that and any loan support that comes out of the access to finance?
I can't speak on behalf of the East Midlands partners who are involved in the development of the fund of funds, but the principle behind it is that you get an agreement between the various steps, certainly to identify and put forward parts of their notional allocation towards the fund of fund. And then you go through some form of ex-ante evaluation of market need and market demand in that area. Now, at a national level, we're working very closely with the European Investment Bank, and that ex-ante evaluation work has been undertaken and is being considered at the moment about what that means within the East Midlands region, and similarly that's happened in West Midlands and other parts of the country. So that work's ongoing. The particular elements of financial engineering instruments are still under negotiation as well, so that has to be taken into account. Now, whether or not, in terms of generally, what does that mean? It means it's a financial envelope against which you can have different types of funds. You need to think about mezzanine loans or equity investments or all sorts of things. Whether or not it will go to the very lowest level of start-up grants, in terms of low value, in terms of fund of funds, but obviously valuable in terms of local need. I really don't know at the moment, and that will come out of the ex-ante evaluation. So there may well be a separate need for that sort of activity as a separate call.
Okay, are there any more questions at this point? Okay, in which case for the rest, for a bit more of this session, what I thought would be really useful is, we've been fortunate in that the timing of this event puts us in advance of any call that might be happening in March and gives us a little bit of time to prepare. But moving forward, that isn't going to be the case, and we're not going to have this as a communication route, and obviously it's only a communication route for those people that are in the room. So what I'd really like to do is spend a bit of time in this workshop on your tables, maybe the next 10 minutes, and we can get some feedback on that. Is what I'd like to do is think about, firstly, what's the information that you feel you're still lacking on, and it would be useful to get a fair indication of that. But secondly, how do you want, you've got managing authorities here, how do you want us to shape the way in which we can help fill some of those information gaps moving forward? How do you want to be kept informed? What format do you want your information in? People clear? It's an opportunity to rant on your tables. So what don't you know now? And how do you want to be told it when it becomes available? Or how do you want us to tell you that there's just no answers to it yet? Right, I'm going to give you 10 up until 20 past, and then I'd like some feedback on that, please. Thank you.